According to Minority Rights Groups International, Colombia has one of the largest Afro Colombian populations in Latin America. Although in 2005, the government claimed that the Afro Colombian population was only about 10.6% of the total population. The figure recognized by the UN and which is used by Afro Colombian leaders and activists is 26% of the total population. This figure is from a 2002 census. Today, Afro Colombians are present in every major city in the country. It is thought that there are 1 million living in Bogota, the capital city alone. In some of the Pacific and Atlantic coastal areas of Colombia, the Afro Colombian population is said to be even higher than 50%. The department of Choco is the most populous Afro Colombian state, followed by Magdalena, Bolivar, and Sucre. Southern Valle, Northern Cauca, and Uraba also have majority black populations. The Afro-Colombian population, unfortunately, is the poorest in the country. So are you still wondering why the Black Lives Matter movement and other anti-black racism movements should be upfront and center global movements? Welcome to the Sankofa Pan-African series. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee so we can continue to bring you this series. Subscribe if you've not yet done so, and please turn on your notification buttons so you know when we have new episodes. And of course, share our videos with all your contacts. So, how did Africans get to Colombia? Some Africans first went to the area now known as the country of Colombia as explorers. By around the 1520s, enslaved Africans were being taken to Cartagena in what is now the country of Colombia. They were taken there by Spanish colonists and Portuguese slave traders from places in modern-day Congo, Angola, Gambia, Nigeria, Cameroon, Liberia, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Senegal, and Mali. The colonists needed them to replace, like in most other places in the South American continent. So the colonists needed them to replace the indigenous population that had almost been depleted, almost completely decimated by the extremely poor conditions under which they were made to live and work on plantations and mines. Enslaved Africans were forced to work in textile mills, emerald mines, gold mines, sugar cane plantations, cattle ranches. They also grew tobacco and cotton and worked as artisans and domestic slaves. African labor was fundamental to the economic growth of all the regions of Colombia. Africans pioneered the extraction of gold deposits and the growing of sugarcane in Choco, Antioquia, Cauca, Valle del Cauca, and Nariño in western Colombia. In eastern Colombia, near the cities of Valles, Cúcuta, Socorro, and Tunja, the manufacture of textiles in commercial mills, emerald mines outside Bogota were fully dependent on the labor of Africans. Africans started fighting for their freedom almost as soon as they got there. Many Afro-Colombian captives fought the Spanish and their colonial forces. Some who escaped formed their own communities, now called palenques, where Africans lived as cimarrones, like the Maroons in places like Jamaica, Haiti, Suriname, and many other places in the Caribbean, or the Quilombos in Brazil. Choco, which is one of the departments or provinces of Colombia, started out as a very big palenque with large population of Cimarrones. Like in the present day United States, African people played key roles in independence struggles against Spain. Some historians actually have said that 3 out of every 5 soldiers in Simon Bolivar's army were African. Unfortunately, just as in places like the US, their involvement in the independence struggles of their country did not benefit the Afro Colombians. Although Colombia became independent in 1810, it was not until 1821 that the Congress of Cocota of Gran Colombia enacted a law for the gradual emancipation of the enslaved people in Colombia. Gran Colombia covered the territories of Nueva Granada and Venezuela. That was the Congress which elected Simon Bolivar as president. So even with Simon Bolivar as president, the Congress did not commit to the full emancipation of the enslaved, but only a gradual move towards doing so. Enslaved Africans in Colombia had to wait 40 years after independence had been won before slavery was abolished on paper. From the beginning of the 19th century, the Colombian government developed a policy of blanqueamiento. Now, blanqueamiento is a state-sponsored campaign to whiten the Colombian population. It is based on a racial ideology that valorizes whiteness. Its sole purpose is based on a desire to keep non-white people, like the Africans and indigenous people, oppressed so that they will never be able to compete with white people politically, economically, or in any other way. It is xenophobia of the most terrible form. As a result of this, many Africans and indigenous peoples were forced to protect themselves and their culture in isolated jungles. It was not until 1944 that the Department of El Choco was formally created and therefore became the first predominantly Afro-Colombian-led administrative division. El Choco opened up some opportunities for Colombians of African descent to preserve their African identity and some form of autonomy in decision making. However, Afro-Colombians and indigenous people were and continue to be targeted by armed actors who want to displace them from their lands, which are coveted for mining and wood exploitation, the establishment of sugarcane and coffee plantations, as well as for growing bananas. All of these are the major export products of the country. So that's why their land is being coveted and they are being forcibly displaced. The relative autonomy of Afro-Colombians in the northern region of Choco came to a violent end in the 1970s when their lands were usurped for cultivation of soya beans. Since then, there has been a steady flow of migration by these communities towards the urban areas as they attempt to escape poverty and the violence that was unleashed on them by land grabbers. Historically, Afro-Colombians have been considered a minority group by the Colombian government. They have continued to be subjected to all forms of discrimination and inequality in areas like education, healthcare, and socioeconomically. Although Afro-Colombians form about 1/4 of Colombia's overall population, they are the poorest ethnic groups. Some studies show that they constitute 3/4 of the poor. So they are only 25% of the total population, but 75% of the poor people in Colombia are Afro Colombians. It's terrible. So according to a study conducted by the National School Union, 65% of Afro Colombians who work in the informal sector and 29% of those who work in the formal sector make less than the minimum wage. Some of this is as a result of government policies that make education beyond primary school level impossible for the majority of Afro-Colombians. So they are deliberately keeping them uneducated so they will remain poor and politically weak. There is also a very wide margin in what Afro-Colombians earn compared to others. This also means that in major cities like Bogota, Afro-Colombians are spatially isolated because they can only afford to live in the poorest areas. Afro-Colombians have been reported to get stopped by the law enforcement agents simply for looking suspicious. They don't even wait for them to commit a crime. They are also denied service in some restaurants and nightclubs. Out of the 25 bills that were proposed by Afro-Colombian legislators between 2002 and 2010, in order to help improve the situation of their people, only 2 were approved. Sources also indicate that violence from armed groups who are battling for territory in areas vacated by FARC since the signing of the 2016 peace agreement particularly impacts the Pacific Coast, which has a large population of Afro-Colombians. And according to the UN's verification mission report of 2019, Colombia, of 2019, conducted in Colombia, illegal armed groups forcibly recruit people, including children, and they commit homicides, displace, confine, and attack Afro-Colombians and indigenous populations. In addition, sources like the Amnesty International report of 2020 indicate that the Afro-Colombian human rights defenders and community leaders are routinely targeted and can be killed for simply speaking out. Afro-Colombians, however, continue to protest and to fight for their rights and demand equality. And there are a number of organizations that have been at the forefront of this, including the National Association of Displaced Afro-Colombians, AFRODES, AFRODES, and Chao Racismo. I think it means a goodbye to racism or something. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee so we can continue to bring you this series. Subscribe if you've not yet done so, and please turn on your notification buttons. Don't forget to share our videos with all your contacts. And of course, keep those comments coming. Thank you.